Hi, I'm Beck. Let's talk about nonfiction, because for a long time I thought it was really boring, but I found a few different things that work for me in terms of subject matter. Sometimes the storytelling can be a bit hit or miss as well, so I'm going to talk about the nonfictions that I read last year and the nonfictions that I've also got on my to-be-read pile. So please let me know in the comments if there are any nonfictions that you have on your TBR, because I'm always looking to try more things. So let's jump into the first book, and that is Page Boy by Elliot Page. So Elliot Page is an Academy Award nominated actor, and in this memoir he shares never before heard details in his life. So he is a trans man, so this is about a female to male transition, and it was also a transition that happened very much in the public eye, and for that reason I found it fascinating in the sense that you got to see Elliot and behind the curtain of his career as well, and the abuse and the non-support of child stars in Hollywood. So I found a lot of aspects of this memoir fascinating. What I didn't like was that at some points it felt like it dragged a little bit when you were looking at flashbacks to his story, but it was also fascinating and in a way grotesque to see the different kinds of abuse that sat behind his career that he just didn't talk about because he didn't feel safe enough to, and how he really struggled with his sexuality and then his gender as well. So in terms of celebrity memoirs, I'm saying I think you should try this one if you are kind of on the fence about it, or if you've never heard about it before, because I found it a really interesting and dark insight in a way into understanding yourself and also having every aspect of yourself scrutinized as well. At times it was shocking, but it was just enough that I could keep reading and I was interested, rather than too shocking in order to be very highly grotesque that would make me want to stop reading. So it very much balanced itself quite evenly. That said though, sometimes those scenes would kind of taper off, and then in between them it would stretch for a while, and those were parts of the story I found a little bit lacking in pace. So my enjoyment went up and down with this one, but overall I would say give it a try because I learned something, and I think if you're reading memoirs or nonfiction in general, it's nice to take something away from a story, no matter how light or dark that is. Then I picked up The Gender Games by Juno Dawson. Now this is a male to female transition, and she says that as her body gets in line with her mind, Juno tells not only her own story, but the story of everyone who is shaped by society's expectations of gender and what we can do about it. So this was not only a almost memoir of Juno's life, and again, like Elliot Page's life and the different substance abuses and impulsive behavior that sat behind his journey to eventually transitioning, Juno was kind of similarly placed in that disparity of space and not understanding who she was and going to impulsive behavior to kind of get a rise out of herself and recognize who she was. So in that sense, it was intriguing and again dark as well, because obviously the substance abuse, but also this was a commentary on gender and society. And I found that quite interesting in the sense that there is a lot that we just don't recognize that is not gender controlled, but that's not exactly what I mean, but gender stereotyped, I suppose, in our everyday life. And the way Juno laid that out in her storytelling was really easy to follow. Although at times, again, like Elliot Page's memoir, I found that it kind of peaked and troughed, and so I wasn't really interested all of the time. And sometimes when you're commentating on society as well, and you're coming from a place of deep knowledge and experience, it's really hard to walk that line between telling the reader what they should think and then presenting an idea. And I think sometimes it overstepped a little bit, at least in terms of my enjoyment level, and it felt like I was being preached at a little bit. That didn't make me want to stop reading the book, but it is something that I noticed, so it kind of took me out of the narrative at that time, when the whole point of the story at that time was to engage with you and bring you further in. So it kind of worked in the opposite way that it should have. So again, this was a middle of the road / enjoyed, and I would say go give it a try, especially because Elliot Page went from a female to male transition and Juno went from male to female transition. So it's nice to kind of read them in tandem and look at the different angles that they tackled telling their stories, which I found personally fascinating. And then I was like, oh, I read 2 books about gender. That's good. Maybe I should now read about trauma. So quite a hard pivot. And I picked up The Body Keeps the Score, which is a very renowned book in terms of the psychological space and what people reach for in reading. Quite a popular narrative. And it follows a doctor who undertakes all these case studies over the past 3 or 4 decades or something of his career, and he's interrogating these different case studies and presenting scientifically of how trauma shapes the body and the brain, which was a fascinating subject matter. Although I did Google this author, and there are some disparities with him. I found out after finishing the book that he was fired from his job over allegations of him bullying his patients. So knowing what kind of person he was, I thought, oh, why are you writing about trauma when your actions are potentially leading to further impact people's trauma? So that didn't quite sit well with me. Overall, there were different case studies in the book though that I want to say I enjoyed. It doesn't feel like the right terminology to use given the darker subject matter of them and how they are people reaching to the darker places of themselves in order to share their story and their psychological growth. But I did find the patterns and the reactions fascinating. So there was something in the book and I liked the scientific discourse as well. What I didn't love was that it was such a long audiobook. I think it was like 20 hours, 21 hours long or something, which just felt too long. That's my major gripe with it. And a lot of the case studies stretched on too long. So I would have enjoyed it more if it was a little bit more bite-sized and had a little bit more discussion about the specific case studies at the end of each one. So as it stands, this one got a bit tedious. And so I'd say read it if you want to read it, but maybe go and look up the doctor or the author first before you read it to see if you actually want to, because I found out all of this about him after I'd finished the book, and I probably would have stopped it halfway or so if I found out during or even before the book. So take that information and do with it what you will. Then going from trauma, I jumped into a book about cults called Cultish, and this one is where the author analyzes the social science of cult influence, how cultish groups from Jonestown and Scientology to SoulCycle and social media gurus use language as an ultimate form of power, which I found personally quite interesting because language can be shaped in however you want it to be. So it can be quite manipulative, but it can also be quite innocent. And I really wanted that analysis of how you can kind of get into someone's psyche. And that was partly explored. I really wanted to know more answers to what the key questions were, which are what makes cults so intriguing and frightening and what makes them powerful. And it feels like this book was a little bit misleading in that sense because it posed those questions from the get-go, but then it delved very briefly into the different case studies and reflections on, Scientology and Jonestown and how people interacted with those things and even interviewing people who are from those cults. So I did find that interesting, but I found it kind of lacked a bit of solidarity and substance. And I think that might just be the way the author writes, because I've heard another book by her, The Magical Art or Age of Overthinking. It was mismarketed or misrepresented as well. It's supposed to be, about anxiety and the magical art of overthinking, but actually it's more of a memoir of the author's life. So it just didn't feel quite right reading Cultish and going, but I wanted a bit more from it though. So it was a good basis, I think, to start with in terms of I want to know more about cults. It kind of laid the groundwork, I guess, and I can now go in different directions depending on what my questions are that I want answered, and I can probably find more subject matter because there's a lot going on out there about cults. So surely I can find something, but it just wasn't quite this book, and that's what I picked it up for. So that was a little bit disappointing. And then the last book that I've read before we jump into my to be read pile, this book was probably my favorite nonfiction that I've read in recent years, and it's called How to Keep House While Drowning. And this is a book that basically revolutionizes how you care for yourself in your home, which I found fascinating, and it was broken down into 6 easy steps, and it was specifically targeted at readers to be digestible, because even listening to the audiobook, it was like, oh yeah, you can skip these chapters if you don't have time. It covers more key information in X, Y, and Z. So it was very to the point, and I really liked that about it. But at the same time, when it got to the point, it didn't rush either. So it was like, here is my point and here is why, and it would explain things and make it very personable. And for that reason, I think I really remember it and connect with it. And it also tells you not to be too hard on yourself as well, because everyone has different ups and downs in life. And I really like how this author said, look, I had a baby during COVID. I felt very isolated. And while I was doing this, I realized I had executive dysfunction trouble. So cleaning was not something that she could do easily and that was easily part of her routine, especially with a newborn. So balancing her lifestyle and just letting things go sometimes, it gave her permission to do that. And I think a lot of the time it's generally easy to get fixated and stressed about different things and realize as an adult, wait, to do my hobby or to do this thing that I enjoy, or even to just sit down on my couch, it means I'm actively ignoring a couple of responsibilities. Something always needs cleaning, basically. And so giving yourself permission to ignore those things every now and then is a good thing for your mental health. And that's what this book really got into and discussed, and it told you how to take shortcuts in your life in order to make things easier. Basically recognize how you work and how you live and incorporate a style that suits you rather than trying to match people's overarching expectations. So I found it quite a refreshing book, and I think a lot more people should give it a try, especially because it was so short as well. And then we get into the books on my to be read pile. There are about 5 or 6 of them, and the first one is called Sapiens. I think this has been doing the rounds, so it's also quite a popular one. And this book is apparently by a renowned historian, and it explores the ways in which biology and history have defined us and enhanced our understanding of what it means to be human. It also says that 100,000 years ago, at least 6 different species of humans inhabited Earth. Yet today there is only one, Homo sapiens. What happened to the others and what may happen to us? So I really like the questions that it's posing from the beginning, and unlike Cultish, I hope that it actually really delves into both of those things in depth, because I would really like to know that. I really like biology and I really like the human existence. Again, I've read about trauma and cult, so I obviously like psychology as well, but this one seems a little bit adjacent to psychology, which is totally fine. So I'm looking forward to trying it out and seeing what all the hype is about, basically. The next one is a bit funny because I just really enjoyed this title, and it's How to Fit All of Ancient Greece in an Elevator, and it's written by an archaeologist, and it's basically a 300-year highlight reel of Greek mythology and how things came to be and what stories interweave. And I'm here for that because I love mythology, and I think this would be a very easy snapshot to digest and then go afterwards, oh, what did I like the most and what do I want to dive into further? So it's a great starting point. I think Greek history and Roman history are, I imagine, quite prolific, and there's a lot going on there, a lot of titles there, it's been investigated a lot. So I think this is like a 9-hour audiobook, which is so doable. So I'm quite looking forward to my bite-sized attempt at the last 300 years of Greek history. Bring it on. The next one is something that I was going to take off my library holds list, but when I mentioned it in a previous video, people were like, no, you probably want to keep that on your holds list. I was like, okay, fine. And that is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And Jeanette McCurdy is an ex-Disney star, so she was a child star through Disney, and a lot of what was going on behind the scenes were quite toxic and not a safe environment at all. Add to that a narcissistic mother who was very manipulative, and it's a 6-hour audiobook, I think, so it very much goes behind the curtain of what was happening at Disney at that time. And I happen to know that there was a lot of abuse going on at that time and a lot of drugs being handled around, so it's not going to be a here is sunshine and roses kind of story, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the narrative style of this actress is and see whether I get on board with listening to the audiobook. The next one I'm not sure about. It's got a decent title and a decent intent, so I think the subject matter I'd be interested in. I just can only find it as an ebook, and I can only borrow ebooks from Libby on my phone, and I hate reading on my phone. So we'll see how I stand with this one. It might come off my TBR and then maybe on again in a few years. We'll see what happens. But it's called The Courage to be Disliked, and it's translated from Japanese, and it's about a philosophy that allows us to develop the courage to change and to ignore the limitations that we and those around us place on ourselves. So it's a very inward look at who you are and what you can do better to make your life better. And I just like those books that make you self-assess, but without also being judgmental. This seems like it's from a very genuine place, and that's what I like about it. And I think there are potentially some positive meditations to take away from this story. So I hope that I end up eventually reading it. We'll see. The next one is an interesting one, and it's the second last one of this video, so not long to go yet. And this is because I haven't really read any books at all about women's health, and I thought It's Not Hysteria would be a good place to start, because not only is it written by Dr. Karen Tang, so she's a doctor and she's on a mission to transform how women engage with their bodies and their healthcare. And it also says that 1 in 3 women experience menstrual abnormalities or pelvic issues, yet these conditions are overwhelmingly misunderstood, misdiagnosed, or dismissed. And I can understand that, especially because a lot of the medical model, I'm not sure in other countries or other societies, but I know definitely in Western cultures and in Australia in particular, we're modeled after the everyman. So a lot of our medical measurements are based on the male body rather than the female body. And so that can be quite challenging when you're a woman trying to get the right care that you need in healthcare to even diagnose the problem. I know a lot of people who have struggled and just not been listened to. So I think It's Not Hysteria is a very valid way to say, hey, we feel crazy because you make us feel crazy. Maybe listen to us, please. So I'd be interested in trying this one out and seeing how I feel about it, especially because it's written by a doctor and not just some random. I'm very picky now with my nonfiction, and I make sure to Google the author, especially after realizing that Doctor of How the Body Keeps the Score was bullying his clients. I was like, I would rather support authors and books that actually have a decent rep. So I think It's Not Hysteria is going to be very well placed in my new regard to Googling authors. And then the last book on this list is, and it's a long title, and it says, The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read and Your Children Will Be Glad That You Did. And it's written by a psychotherapist. So her name is Philippa Perry, and she tells us what really matters and what behavior is important to avoid, just in terms of raising your own kids and how you have been raised as well, and recognizing different models of behavior patterns and how to break different cycles, or even recognize that you're perpetuating a cycle, or recognize that you're in a cycle yourself and it's been carried on from your childhood and you can now break it as an adult. So I would be very much interested to look into that story, especially because we're expecting a baby in July. So it's a very timely and topical thing for me to be reading. And once I'm finished with it, I know my partner Dave will be wanting to read it too. So with all of that said, that is all of the nonfiction that I have on my to be read pile that I've recently read. Nonfiction feels like it could be boring, but I found a few things that I enjoy, and I found a few more things that I hope to enjoy. So please let me know if you have anything to recommend me. I would love to know. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.